Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Christina Hoff-Summers.
I'm Danielle Crittenden.
And today we're going to interview the legendary Tina Brown of Vanity Fair fame.
Well, she's come out very recently with a memoir of her years where she really reinvented Vanity Fair, called the Vanity Fair Diaries. But she's also just one of those people who has, as the memoir shows, just been at the center of power and fame.
And scandal.
Since the 80s.
Yes.
And
she saw it all. She was there and just such a great observer. And I read this book. I didn't know what to expect. And I couldn't put it down. Her memoirs are fascinating because she took notes. She had a front row seat in the 1980s, the 90s, in New York City, in the world of journalism and celebrity and great writing. And
through the whole boom and bust.
Yes.
When she
went to all the parties. Jane Austen said you could learn all you need to know from parties. She learned so much at parties, and she tells all in this book.
Right, and we think of her as an editor, but in fact, as this book shows, but she's written other books, she's a very accomplished, not just accomplished writer, she is such a shrewd observer of modern life.
Mores and foibles. You know, it's Proustian in its...
Or with the archness of Thackeray. The depths of Proust and the archness of Thackeray.
Well, anyway, you can see we're fangirls, and I'm a little excited and nervous to be talking to her, but I think it's going to be wonderful.
Well, here are some fun femme facts about her before we bring her on.
Fact.
So, as mentioned, she's just written this fabulous book called The Vanity Fair Diaries, where she edited and really recreated Vanity Fair magazine from 1984 to 1992. And she went from there to the New Yorker magazine, which at that point was so staid and tired. And as she pointed out, it was published for writers, but not its readers. And they would run, do you remember the old New Yorker? They'd run like 50,000 word essays on like seed.
And you wouldn't know who wrote them.
And you wouldn't know who wrote them.
So you didn't want to know.
You didn't want to sit next to that guy at a dinner party. But what she did there was also incredible. Then she created Talk Magazine and Talk Media with Miramax in 1999.
With Harvey Weinstein. We'll have to ask her about that.
Oh, we are so going to ask her about that. Although I did say to, I think it was The Guardian, she was asked about it, and she said, what is it about old men and bathrobes? So I don't know how closely she worked with Harvey. Let's hope not too closely, but we'll find out. And then she founded the Daily Beast in 2008. So she went from the medium of magazines without missing a beat to the medium, of the internet.
Well, we also have to ask her about Oxford University, where she was a young writer and star and who dated, Martin Amis, and she knew Christopher Hitchens. And
back in the very old days.
Yeah.
And then she married a man somewhat older than herself, Harry Evans, who he was a legend at the time.
Inappropriately older.
Oh, look who's talking.
Yeah.
Look who's talking, Christina. You
better an old man's darling than a young man's slave, my grandmother told me.
But he also, they came to America, and we'll talk about that, but he founded the modern Condé Nast Traveler, just like along the way while he happened to be here.
And also a great, heroic investigative reporter who broke the story about thalidomide,
right?
This drug that was creating birth defects, and there'd been a cover-up, and he's a fantastic journalist, and
they've both been knighted. Although I don't know if you call
she's been knighted too.
Yeah, she's a proper lady.
I thought she was a lady because she was married to a knight.
No,
oh my
she
goodness.
got her own. It's called CBE, Commander of the Order of the British Empire, in 2000. So we should actually call her Lady Evans.
Lady Evans, and she did all of this while having 2 kids
and one
wonderful marriage, and one of the children has Asperger's.
Asperger's.
So that was, she managed it all. She has it all, has done it all, and it shouldn't be possible. We'll have to find out her secret.
All right, let's bring her on. Welcome, Tina Brown, to the Femsplainers.
We're so happy to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be with you.
And we have just so many questions and topics that I know we're not going to be able to get to, but you've done so much in your life and met so many extraordinary people, as well as being, of course, extraordinary yourself. Christina, how do we start? Do we go high or low?
Oh, let's go low, just to start. So, Lord Byron was famously called mad, bad, and dangerous to know, and you said people perceive you as flashy, fast, and scandalous, which sounds so great to me, but How do you feel about that?
I feel rather old, actually, when I think that anybody then could think of me as flashy, fabulous, and scandalous or whatever. I wish they thought about me that now. They probably think, boring,
Oh, you couldn't be boring.
Oh, no, the invisible years. Oh, to be flashy.
Right, exactly. Oh, to be flashy. I wish that I could be seen as this hot, meretricious, creature. It would be so great.
Well, in your book, there are many, many men who seem to find you and have found you over the years very
beguiling
and flashy. So, and including some who are now in a little bit of trouble for that, which we can get to.
We'll get to them.
Where
do we start? 80s parties?
Well, I have a question just by way of background, because this is what we didn't talk about in the introduction. You came to New York after successfully reinventing Tatler magazine in London when you were the wise, experienced age of 25. And then you married Harry Evans, who was already a legendary newspaper editor at the time, also somewhat your senior. And then you were continuing to build an amazing career there, including as a writer. So what made you want to come to New York rather than continue on in London?
Well, I always was wildly attracted by America. I think because I'd had early success in London, it was as if America was the big time. I wanted to be on Broadway, if you like, in acting terms. And I was very excited by the whole kind of imagery of the American magazine world. I was a great addict of the old Vanity Fair, the magazines like Esquire, in the days of Harold Hayes, Clay Felker's New York magazine, which was a great legendary magazine at the time, and in the 70s. And I was very turned on by it. It felt so much more big in scope and sort of mega bucks, and it was a very exciting thing. And I really thought that making it meant making it in America. And, I was a very ambitious young woman.
With you seem not to have the usual self-doubt. I'm amazed just by your pluck and confidence.
Yeah,
it's funny that. People have said that when they read the diaries. I suppose I was. I actually felt that I was very unconfident in a million ways, but I was always very confident about my talent, honestly. I never doubted that I could do a great job if somebody gave me the wherewithal to do it. I had a vision, I had a determination, and I really wanted to tell the stories. I was driven to tell stories. I loved telling them. And one reason I wanted my own magazine in the first place was that as a freelance writer, I found that I had more ideas than I could write myself, and that actually my ideas I felt were more interesting than the ones I was being given to write. And I found it frustrating to be selling all the time, having to sort of pitch an idea to somebody else. Right. I began to think how great it would be if I didn't have to pitch somebody else, that I could just simply do the stories that I thought were worth doing. And, I didn't really care how I did that, a small, big, large, whether it was, what kind of thing it was. But I felt an increasing sort of lust to have my own arena in which to play. When the Tatler came along, it was a kind of failing shiny sheet with a staff of about 7 or 8. And, it really wasn't much, but it was my show, and what I wanted was my show. And it was enormous fun to have a show to run. And as soon as I started doing that, I found I was actually good at that. And I knew where to find and how to find talent. And I have always been able to build teams everywhere I've gone. And I feel proud because everything I've built has kind of lasted. I feel that if you come on and you change something and you hire people and then it collapses when you leave, you weren't such a success. I'm very proud that, both Tatler, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker,
Daily Beast,
all kind of stayed very successful with the people that I hired. And, and even the things that didn't work, like Talk Magazine, it was incredible staff, and they went off and did great things elsewhere. And the Daily Beast, had an amazing team. In fact, they all blur in my mind because I've worked in so many places, and some of them have overlapped too. So it's a great group of people everywhere I've gone.
I think one of the things you brought to the United States, I'm from Canada, as I think you know, and so we grew up very much with that British tabloid high-low mix, as they call it, and something that wasn't familiar to Americans. And you brought that to Vanity Fair, and that's how you reinvented it. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm a great fan of that. And, when people always kind of say the word British tabloid journalism, it is always as a term of abuse. It's like, British tabloid journalism. And people always think of that as a kind of yellow scandal.
It's a sign. It's high praise from me.
Yeah, high praise.
What I think of with a lot of tabloid journalism is just enormously entertaining and full of flair. And actually, one of the things I always thought of, and I think I say it somewhere in the diary, is about, so much talent put to such kind of, frivolous ends. But there is there is a lot of talent on those tabloids because there is a literary newspaper culture in the UK where the art of writing headlines, the art of a caption, the art of a photograph that has a kind of mischievous subtext with a great counterpunching headline on it or a great overline of the paper that makes you buy it. These are the kind of things that are the craft tools, if you like, of tabloid journalism. And I did bring those to Vanity Fair. And I think when you mix that with a high content or a more upscale content, that combination of upscale and tabloid is actually very, very effective. And when I founded the Daily Beast digital, site, news site, my actual goal was to create, in a sense, a digital red top, as those tabloids used to be called, which would have all the kind of flair and energy and sort of delinquent sort of pitch, if you like, of a tabloid, but at the same time had very sort of a lot of highbrow, smart writing that went with it. And it's a kind of wonderful combination, actually.
And am I right, though, that this was a fairly new concept for Americans? That it was familiar?
I think it was a concept that was not familiar to Americans. I mean, I think, there's been plenty of flair in American journalism, of course, and at the time that I arrived, actually, the Washington Post style section was particularly good at that, and I think, had its own particular flavor. But I think the high-low concept is very much a European concept, not necessarily as British, actually, because I think the French and Italian magazines and newspapers do have that a bit. And actually, when I founded Talk magazine, you see how many things I've done. When I founded Talk magazine, my concept was to do a European news magazine that combined that tabloid European approach with glossy magazine journalism. So I've always been a big fan of that strand.
Now, to talk about the memoirs, what the parts, I liked so much of it, but particularly your descriptions of parties. These parties in the 80s, in this Gilded Age in New York City, and you didn't drink. How did you, what was that made you a very sober observer?
It was of course, there were two things. First of all, yes, true, I don't drink, and I never did, and I'm sure if I had drunk, I would not have been talking to you about the Vanity Fair Diaries. There was also the thing that I came with that beady eye of the outsider. Here I am, I arrived from London, used to a very different scale and a different kind of society, and I'm plunged into this very sort of hectic, acquisitive, animal spirits of Wall Street moment when dinner parties were the sort of flavor of the whole tempo of the times. I mean, it's really incredible to me that people would be giving sit-down dinner parties for 30 in black tie in their apartments. And they did it all the time, actually.
They didn't do it in London.
Night after night. You could have spent every night of the week in black tie in somebody's apartment in Park Avenue, dressed to the teeth in your Christian Lacroix poof dress with red nails, having all of these events. And I mean, that is something that is really gone. I mean, yes, I'm sure there are madly acquisitive dinner parties in some part of town where I don't want to necessarily be. But, it is a different thing. And I think some of it was about still the ascendance of the hostess, which there really isn't anymore. I mean, I think because now all women really work. And even rich women want to have a vanity entrepreneurial career or be designing bags like Ivana Trump. So there is a sense that kind of thing of a woman spends a day planning an amazing dinner party with place cards is kind of gone.
But you wrote about this. One of your best descriptions is about a 1980s trophy wife who is trying to do that career and also running this incredible social life. And you wrote taking French lessons and piano lessons and the cordon bleu taster menus. And then she has to go to house parties on the weekend. And you said, no wonder she looks like a zombie. So are you saying that the New York of today, they've just given that up? They're just going to the designing bags and not trying to do everything else?
Yeah, I think that stressed out social life where everybody's dressed to the teeth and there's a competition for dinners with 5 different wines and all that. That is definitely, I think mostly gone. I mean, I do occasionally see it, but it really was also the era of Ivana Trump. Don't forget. I mean, Pat Buckley in the Diaries tells that wonderful story to me over dinner that she's invited by Ivana Trump to stay at Mar-a-Lago for the weekend for a quote spa weekend, and Pat Buckley is put in the Conquistador suite, and she cannot. It's so big and so enormous and so grand, she can't find her way back to the dinner. So she spends the entire night blundering around Mar-a-Lago trying to find her way back into this dinner for Ivana Trump. And when she finally finds the dinner party, she finds that far from being as she is, dressed in a bandana and a linen dress for like the spa weekend, all of these women are sitting there, in taffeta ball gowns with diamonds and their hair all coiffed and red nails and the high heels and the whole thing. And she's blown away because she thought it was going to be a spa weekend. And I think it's very funny, but that's very much the kind of stuff that was going on.
Can we talk about some of the people that you met then and are still familiar today, but
like Jackie Kennedy?
Jackie Kennedy. You had a story about Jackie Kennedy giving you the most elegant shiv at a dinner party. At your own dinner party, in your own house, you were shivved.
Indeed. I mean, well, Jackie, we covered Jackie, which of course she didn't like, and did a cover story which we called Jackie Yo, which I'm sure she found.
Is her rap name?
So we gave a dinner party for my husband, who was at Random House at the time, was publishing the memoirs of Clark Clifford, the great sort of eminence Greece of the sort of Democratic Party. Yes. And as a result, he was publishing this memoir. One of his guests was his great friend Jackie Kennedy, and I'm sure she thought a lot about whether she should come or not, but I think she decided to come and sort of double the kind of diss me by pretending to be incredibly nice when she arrived. But then over dinner, she started this breathy little story about this very, very funny piece. Oh, such a funny piece about this really ridiculously naive writer, this terribly naive writer who's called Gail Sheehy, who wrote this ridiculous piece about Gorbachev in her naive way. She simply didn't understand Russian noise. And she went on like this.
Oh,
and of course, she knew perfectly well that this book that was being written about was actually a Vanity Fair story that had ended up as a book, and Gail Sheehy was my writer. And basically she was saying, I'm going to sit here and dish this to you because I know that Gail's your writer. I'm going to let you know what I really think. She was sort of looking at me sideways in this way that she knew that I knew. It was just a great little Jane Austen moment.
Anna Wintour. So you, throughout the book, were extremely impressed with her, and, nothing like the Devil's Wear Prada moment with you. And in fact, you have this wonderful description about her when she came to Condé Nast. I guess she'd been in London, and then she came over to Condé Nast and was positioned to take over Vogue. And you describe her as, her presence upstairs is like a sleek-haired racehorse pawing the other side of the fence. Tell us a little bit about Anna. I'm sure you remain friends with her, but contra the...
Well, it was great because, Anna was, I say in the book, she's clip, all this. And that is this Anna. I mean, what I've always actually liked about Anna, and what is absolutely... Sometimes people find it daunting, but, since I'm somewhat like it myself, I always understood it. She's all about business, Anna. There isn't any sort of bedside manner about wrapping it up. She says what she wants to say, and, it's in and it's out, and it's like, this is what I'm doing. And there's a great moment when she calls me up and she says, oh, Tina, by the way, I'm taking Andrew Lynn Talley to be my fashion editor. He's my fashion editor, all right? I mean,
but you won't mind, of course.
She does. She does the right thing, and says that she lets me know, which was very courteous. She didn't have to let me know, but she's also letting me know that it was a done deal, and that was it. And it wasn't like, look, I know this is unfortunate that you probably value him, but nonetheless, it was like, oh, by the way, and it's okay. It was. I got Anna, and actually we coexisted in a very sort of we shared much more than we didn't in that we were both pregnant at the same time. I remember being in the elevator when we were both 7 months pregnant. And I'm looking at her in this beautiful beanpole in a with a tiny little kind of boa hat bulge in a Chanel jacket. And I'm standing there feeling like an absolutely huge elephantine, barrage balloon. And I'm thinking, how do I not look like that pregnant? How do I get to have that tiny little bulge and we're both the same amount pregnant?
Well, I was thinking that of both of you, but mainly you. I mean, you go to all these parties and you don't seem to gain weight. And then you have 2 children and this high-octane career, and people say, oh, you can't do it all. You did it all. Advice? We have a lot of young women listeners.
Well, one of the things I learned is that there is no magic bullet and there is no rosebud. You have to just make it up as you go along. And what you see in the Vanity Fair Diaries sort of backstage is this constant improvisation and constant sort of self-castigation about, am I being a good mother, a bad mother? How do I get out of doing this? Because all I really want to do is to be with my child. Then I'm with my child, and I'm kind of thinking, why didn't I do this instead? It's this endless
self-doubt
one goes through as a working mother, of always feeling somehow the world is sort of wrong footing whatever choice you make at every time. And yet, at the same time, I do manage to kind of somehow cram it all in. At one point, actually, I ran into somebody and asked them, who had children like I did, I was always asking women who worked to give me the solution, because I always thought there was one woman somewhere who had the answer. It was like some kind of magic spell. Somebody would be able to turn around and say, this is how you do it. So I asked this woman who's a publisher, I said, you've got 2 kids and you've run a publishing house. I'm like, how do you do it? And she looked at me and she said, I was tired for 18 years. And I said, well, there you go. It's exactly right. I mean, you just sort of crash on and crash through the barriers, and you wind up and suddenly you turn around and you're like 49 and somehow your children are on the way to college. But,
I know, and then you can go to a movie. Please join the Femsplainers.
Yes, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or your favorite podcast hangout.
And follow us on Instagram at the Femsplainer Podcast.
And find the Femsplainers on Facebook and Twitter at Femsplainers.
And learn all about us at femsplainers.com. Thank you.
Yeah, Femsplainer. You had, which is always awful, but especially awful when it's your very first child. You had your son was born weeks premature. His first weeks were in the hospital. You had to go to the hospital. You're also at that point just in the very early years of creation of Vanity Fair. And you just seemed absolutely ripped apart, and that you also blamed yourself for his prematurity. You didn't take it seriously, that you had to roll it back. What do you think now, like when you look back on that?
Well, it was a very, very painful time, and a very painful time. And, it actually grieves me when I read the book to read how much pain and confusion I went through as I was starting to become aware that there was something not right about Georgie. And at first I didn't realize it, because when it's your first child, you have nothing to compare it to. And gradually I came to realize that, there was something not quite right, that I didn't understand. Was this because of the prematurity? What was it? Was it my fault? And then later I discover, which I write about in the epilogue, that actually my son has Asperger's syndrome. At that time, that really didn't even have a label. I just knew that there were developmental differences, that he had issues, and it was a lifelong struggle. And, he's now 32, but he's doing, very well. He has, he can drive. He has his own lovely little job. He's got his own little apartment. He's really doing great, actually. He really is. But it was just a very painful journey to learn what was wrong, and fearing that I wasn't succeeding at being his mother, and worrying about him. But, also a great deal of love, and it enhanced the bond hugely between my husband and I. I mean, we had this adored special child who the greatest love of our lives. At that time, we also had a daughter who came along who's also the love of our lives. But it was part of the great emotional journey of being a mother. You never know what life is going to do.
Can you talk a little bit about your marriage? Because that's one of the other sort of magical stories in the book, that the
love affair.
The love affair. But you're also both doing similar things. You're both ambitious. Do you think you could have done what you did without that marriage? How important was that marriage to your career, your ambition, to everything?
I mean, everything. I mean, my husband, who I married, as you said at the outset, when I was a young journalist, and he was a very well-known editor-in-chief of a newspaper. It's just one of those amazing, lucky romances that turned out to be a lifelong love affair. We've been married now, nearly 40 years. We still are as sort of passionately engaged with each other as we ever were. Although he's 25 years older, he's going to be 90 in June, which I cannot believe. But he swims 70 lengths every morning, and right now he's just sitting downstairs writing a piece for The Guardian, So he's unchanged, it seems, in terms of energy and intellect. But he has always been my kind of mentor, my best friend, my inspiration, But the main thing about him is he always loved strong women. I mean, I think some women who are strong and who are achieving are not blessed necessarily with a spouse or partner who somehow is really genuinely rooting for their success to the point that it's impeding to them in some way. That it's not always fun to be married to somebody high octane, because they're not always there, or they're not always engaged with you, or they're not always focused on you, whatever. And he was always someone who loved me having this career as much as I did, and never felt threatened by it. I think he's very self-confident personally, and had his own great successes, but he never felt threatened by mine. And I think that's extremely rare, actually, because a lot of people say, yes, I'm so proud of my wife/husband, but and actually underneath they're actually quite jealous, or they're thinking they feel neglected, or they, it's complicated sometimes having.
And you both went through ups and downs at different times, and yet you both seem to hold each other up during those
Exactly. That has happened throughout our lives together, and we always married each other as opposed to somebody who had a job, if you know what I mean. And so whether or not we were at the top of our games or, going through a slough of despond, it never impeded, love for each other. So, and the bond of our children was just so deeply important to us, having to go through this journey with Georgie and so on. I mean, we feel very blessed to have had that, actually. I wouldn't have changed that for anything.
Let's go back to some of the other 80s characters, including the...
Let's go to those scoundrels.
The elephants in the room.
Harvey.
So
what was it like?
You meant. There's a couple of elephants, actually.
A few.
Yeah.
Too many. Tell us about Harvey. Because
Harvey's not in the diaries, but Donald Trump is.
Oh, yeah.
We're getting
Donald Trump
We're
at the dinner party where you...
Well, let's go to Harvey first.
Let's go to Harvey
start with
first.
Harvey, because you were at one point involved with Talk Magazine. You founded it with Miramax, and it had a great business model. You were going to bring stories, if I remember correctly, to Hollywood. How well did you know Harvey Weinstein?
Well, I knew him extremely well because I left the New Yorker in 1998 to go work for him for 2 years, or with him for 2 years. So I know him very, very well. I mean, I never suffered the sexual harassment because, somehow I wasn't his kind of target victim, if you like.
Was he fun to talk to or hang out?
He was a monstrous. He was a monstrous person to work with, and
really, yeah,
and a Jekyll and Hyde in that, so charming when he's romancing you to come, and as soon as that contract is signed, you see the very ugly dark side, and it was one of the hardest. It was certainly the hardest professional experience I've ever been through.
In what way?
Because he was a tremendously destabilizing force because he was such a bully.
A bully.
And in fact, when I listened to that FBI sting tape that was made by Ambra Gutierrez-Battilana, who did the sting tape, which is the FBI, for the FBI, and I hear that voice, bullying, wheedling, manipulating, sort of chivying, threatening. It just was exactly the voice I used to dread every day that I worked with, because he was a very intimidating individual because he was so unpredictably and explosive and profane and scary. I mean, he's a very scary guy.
He's a scary guy, but he could put on the charm. So he's a sociopath.
He really could, yeah.
He's a sociopath.
Were you surprised
he was very
when you
charming.
heard this come out?
People forget that. I mean, as a matter of fact, now when, we read all the monster stories about Harvey, people forget the success of Harvey was that he wasn't always a monster. That there were two sides to him.
Right.
And otherwise, he wouldn't have been as successful as he was.
Were you surprised?
If you sat at a table with him, did he have conversation? Did he have jokes? Was he an entertaining?
Oh, he was tremendous company. Harvey was some of the best company you could imagine, when he wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
If he were a target, if he was somebody that he wanted something from and he was trying to charm, his great charm would be that he'd be incredibly engaged with everything that you had done. I mean, he would be someone who, if you're a writer, he's read all your books. And he had, by the way, because he was very voracious intellectually, actually. And I think his success with actors was often because he had actually seen all their films, and he usually did have the right idea for what they should be doing. So, it wasn't like you can't be a monster unless you have the charm to seduce people like Bluebeard through the door,
or the devil.
So he was able to do that.
Were you surprised by the extent of the revelations when they came out, even though you knew him as a bully?
Well, I was shocked at the violence of them, yes. I mean, I really was shocked at the violence of them. I knew that he was egregious, sordid man, but I did not know how violent and how relentless and how grotesque it was. That I think shocked most people.
Can we talk about another charming person from the 80s who has maybe become kind of monstrous? Donald Trump. When you first met him, you said, this was in 1987, that you went to a party and you said you were amused to be, quote, immediately introduced to Trump himself. He was all over me. I don't think you mean in that way. He was all over me, hoping to charm me into favorable presentation in the mag. So direct and candid that it's refreshing. And then you later, and the years go on, you assigned Marie Brenner to write a profile of him. And you note in your diary, Marie has been able to establish such a pattern of lying and loudmouthing in Trump that it's incredible he still prospers and gets the banks to loan him money. Great quote where his brother says, Donald was the kid who threw cake at the birthday party. The revelation that he has a collection of Hitler's speeches at the office is going to make a lot of news.
And it did. Boy.
It did.
It made him so mad that
I got him pretty right, actually.
Oh my gosh, that just sums up everything, including the kid who throws cake at the birthday party.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I also said when I extracted his book, The Art of the Deal, which I did in Vanity Fair, that it was bullshit, but it was authentic bullshit. and that kind of sums him up. I mean,
it does.
You know you're getting bullshit, but people like it because it's authentic. And I did like him. I mean, I found him at that time candid, refreshing, cut through the kind of nonsense of that 80s kind of frou-frou. I thought it was a lot of fun, but as the years went by, as you say, I did also begin to see this dark side of him, and I think that he changed, actually. I mean, I sometimes think that his peak moment, Trump, was the Gold Tower moment when he made, I go to the opening in the Diaries of the Trump Tower, and I say that he was bounding around amongst the guests like a prosperous young feline in a white silk scarf. And he seemed, at that time, again, he was kind of the guy who was rising and making it. And actually, I think people slightly underestimate how much Ivana was important to him in his success, because Ivana was the social networker. Ivana was the one who wanted to be at the ladies who lunch dinners and kind of got Trump into that kind of big social circle where, all these hostesses we spoke of were kind of reigning supreme. Once the Ivana marriage was over, actually, Trump withdrew into Trump Tower, when you consider it. And, I never ever saw him again at any social function in New York after the divorce from Ivana. It was like he
That's interesting.
became this kind of Howard Hughesy kind of guy surrounded with sort of mob lawyer people and weird, dodgy money people. And I think kind of became increasingly angry and strange.
And now we have Melania. If you were still editing Vanity Fair and you wanted a story on Melania, how would you approach it? Is it possible? I mean, wouldn't it be interesting to find out more about her?
I find Melania quite fascinating, actually. I think Melania is the only one of the whole gang who's kind of going to emerge with a sort of whatever the shreds of her reputation might be. Because she has learned, she's the only one with any self-discipline, actually, or kind of control. I mean, she's basically made some deal with herself and him where she is going to do this role, and she's going to play it out, and she's not going to put a foot wrong. She's going to do what she has to do. And she's doing it not badly, really. I mean, she's not doing it with there's not a lot going on, but I think she's doing okay with the role, actually. So I think she's in a funny way the only one who gets any respect, and I think she's kind of popular. She's rather an important weapon for him, as a matter of fact.
Well, it's also sort of strange because, I mean, you've covered so many first ladies and presidents, of course, but maybe most famously you had that cover of Nancy and Ronald Reagan dancing, and the story that you tell of how you inadvertently not just got them to do that, but they suddenly started dancing to Frank Sinatra in front of you. But the thing about Melania is she's not really doing much as first lady, except, as you say, being very presentable, very beautiful, but very quiet.
Yeah, and very reserved, and she's not getting drawn into anything.
But she doesn't do stuff either. Like, you don't see that kind of engagement.
She doesn't do stuff, but just not doing stuff is really a blessed respite compared to everybody else, right? I mean, everybody else around him is spinning like dervishes, getting drawn into scandals, tweeting insanely. Look at Anthony Scaramucci. That was a wonderful turn that should have been done as a kind of, I'd like to see Anthony, the musical, Anthony Scaramucci on ice. I mean, he entered stage left juggling on point, and then he crosses the stage in a blaze of music and dancing and then disappears off the cliff. We've seen quite a few acts like that amongst these guys. And so she just sits there being like the still center of chaos. That's not a bad strategy.
Yeah, you described him as the ultimate personification of the gilded grossness of the 80s. Donald Trump is president of the United States, and as a consequence of his excesses and the boom in fake and Fox News, an appreciation of powerful independent journalism reviving. We may even be at the start of a new golden age. I would love your thoughts on the current media and where we're going.
Well, I suspect that when I wrote that, I might have been in a kind of dreamy aspiration state. Look, I think that actually, oddly enough, the excesses of Trump have indeed triggered such a kind of deep reaction, both in terms of social activism and journalistic energy, that sometimes it takes hitting the rock bottom of the morass to kind of be re-energized anywhere. So in a sense, both activism generally and journalism have become kind of torpid, and in a strange way, the BuzzFeed listicle, if you like, approach to journalism, which was the kind of Obama-era paradigm, kind of went out as soon as Trump appeared, where people were suddenly not wanting to read listicles. They were actually wanting to read the latest expose about the FBI raid on Michael Cohen's apartment. You know, it's energized journalism in a tremendous way. So there is that good thing that's happened. Of course, you know, at the same time, we've seen the rise of something absolutely dreadfully pernicious, which is, you know, fake news and
fake
the
news
whole kind of attempt by Trump to distort and defile the whole concept of journalism. And I think that one of the things I'm really particularly concerned about at the moment is that particularly TV news has now kind of really, really unfortunately decided to kind of meet him where he lives. It's like he's baited the news media over the cliff with him. Now, all we get when you turn on any cable news channels now, it's like there is no other story except Trump.
But to be fair, it's an incredible 24/7 story. I mean, I get fatigue from it, but I still want to watch it. And I don't think I want to watch it because I'm being prurient. We need to know what is happening. And the problem is there's just so many things happening.
No, it's true. I mean, the story is absolutely addictive. We have to know what's happening. It's enormously, everything about it is consequential. The only problem is that you also get outrage fatigue. So the constant high pitch of outrage about everything big and small, unfortunately, somewhat takes the edge off what, the single thing that day we need to be really outraged about. So that's the bit that I find kind of wearying, I have to say, is that I hope that doesn't continue to happen. I do think that there has been a lot of very good journalism, though, and we've seen stars are being made every few months who are doing great pieces in every place.
Well, in the Me Too, it was born through journalism, through the New Yorker.
And I don't think that would have happened without Trump, so...
Right.
Absolutely.
You said last question, because I know you have to go, Tina, but you said in your epilogue, I feel every day the stirring to tell new stories and a recurring sensation in my life of new beginnings, restlessness. That maybe one of your great gifts is that you are chronically restless. And when you look at the media today, you're doing amazing things with your Women in the World conferences, but do you feel you just want to get back in that game?
Yes, I do miss having a news outlet, and I think that I think I would love it if I could combine what has been my mission for the last 9 years, Women in the World, which does tell stories in a very kind of live journalism way. I think it'd be great if I could combine that with a news platform, which is a kind of Reuters for Women idea, and that is something that would appeal to me. But
Reuters.
But I also do understand that, I know that sadly the business model for serious journalism is enormously challenged, and it's a very daunting thing to take on the business challenge. I want to just tell the stories and be the news journalist that I am. And in a way, that's become a luxury that I was lucky enough to have at Vanity Fair, the New Yorker, the Daily Beast, all of the things I've done. But it's very hard to have that luxury anymore. Most of the editors I know spend their time not thinking about stories and journalism, but about the whole kind of existential question of how do you stay alive as a news entity. And that's what I think is the major problem that has to get solved.
Well, just as a final question, you once wrote that you can teach a writer how to write a lead or how to structure a story, but you can't teach them how to see. I want to know, how do you write a lead?
Pretending it's for advice for young writers.
Young writers. I'm an old writer, but I have trouble with leads. Is there a trick? I just want
to write a lead. Most of the time, what you have to do with a lead is you do what one of my writers at Vanity Fair used to call, and I have it in the diaries, and my husband uses it all the time. You do your vomit draft, okay, right? Which means that you just throw up on the page everything you've got, which gets it out of your system. Then you sit back, have a cup of coffee, go for a walk around the block, and you come back and you discover that your lead is on paragraph 9.
Oh,
that's
my
so
goodness.
True. That's
a vomit draft.
A vomit draft. All right, we've got a new term. Tina, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast, and thanks for this gift of your book and everything you've given this side of the pond.
And thank you for being flashy.
It's so much fun, and I'm still having fun, and I'm having a real, we just did our last Women in the World Summit 2 weeks ago, and it was so fantastic, as energized as ever. So I love coming on the show, and thank you so much.
Well, stay flashy. I think that should be our new hashtag.
Flashy.
Stay flashy.
And scandalous. Scandalous.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was fun.
I know. She was so interesting, and I just forgot to ask her so many things.
I really wanted to talk to her about the royals, Meghan Markle. Just didn't have time for that.
Yes, I wonder what she thinks. I mean, now they seem to be more stable. these royals.
The royal. Well, she wrote a piece for The Guardian that thought that Meghan Markle was the absolute perfect branding of the modern royal family, that she's biracial, she's American, she thinks she'll do a marvelous job. I don't know how the English are going to take it, but I would have loved to hear what she had to say.
Won't you miss royals behaving badly? Just a little bit? If they're well behaved, unless this whole thing falls apart. I'm not saying I want it to, but I'm just saying.
The other thing that I took away was how originally charmed she was by Donald Trump. And she says that in her book. And I think this was many people's reaction to him back in the
She was at some tedious dinner party, and the person next to her wouldn't speak to her. And he was there across the table.
Livened it up.
And saying inappropriate things, and she was amused.
Well, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I sat next to Donald Trump at a dinner.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Before...
You held this back all these years?
I did.
What happened?
Well, it was at...
Oh, do you have one of these agreements? A non-disclosure?
Gosh, mine would be worth so little if there was a... I can disclose all I know, which is I found this was at a birthday party for friends of ours in New York, and Tina Brown was actually at our table. She was a mutual friend. And I got to the table ahead, and this was before The Apprentice, so he was still that kind of New York character, but he wasn't yet Donald Trump, The Apprentice, let alone president. But got to the table, I saw that his place card was next to mine, and I just about died because I thought, oh my gosh.
What am I going to say?
What am I going to say? What am I going to do? And just as I was contemplating switching around the place cards, he comes in and he sits down and I sit down, and he was hilarious. He was the most entertaining dinner party. And we talked. On my other side was this incredibly old billionaire who eventually went to prison.
Okay.
And he wasn't very fun. So I spent my time talking to Donald Trump, and there was something going on in New York, and we were making bets on it. I remember Tina Brown looking across the table and sort of raising her eyebrows about what was going on this side of the table. And then, years later, I look back on it and everything now we know that has happened. And I feel a little hurt and insulted because I must be the only woman in America he didn't make a pass at.
We need a why not me hashtag.
I know. It's like, what am I, Donald?
Yeah.
4?
Yeah.
No, it never happened. I hear these stories and I say, well, that never happened to me.
I know. Well, I know.
Well, that was a lot of fun. She doesn't drink, so we can't have I don't want a mocktail. I don't want to have a Shirley Temple. So
A Roy Rogers, a Shirley Rogers.
why don't we come up with a drink from the 80s, like a Blue Lagoon?
Ooh, a Blue
One of
Lagoon.
those electric blue drinks. Yeah, let's do that. All right.
To the
To the
80s.
To the 80s.